work
The
session
broadcast is
between the
now
King
starting.
George
All
Board of
attendees are
Supervisors
in listen-only
and the
mode.
King George County School Board. Can everybody hear me? All right. That being said, we will open up the floor to public comment. Would anyone like to come to the podium and speak? Please remember you 3 minutes, and please state your name and address. Would anybody like to come up to the podium and speak? All right. Is there anybody online up there? Nope. And does anybody have any written correspondence? Either side. All right. With that being said, we will hand the baton over to Dr. Benson to give the Schools CARES Act request.
Thank you. Before I do so, Ms. Pansera, did you want to just bring the school board?
Oh, yep. Sorry.
Session? Officially just call this meeting of the joint meeting to order for the record.
Okay, I'd like to call the King George County School Board joint session with the King George County Board of Supervisors, CARES Act work session number 2 to order. And I guess, do we do the public comment as well?
I think you satisfied the public comment, I assume.
Is that correct, Mr. Britton? We just have to do one public comment, correct, for this one?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
One public comment. I can't.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. Just crossing, dotting all our I's. Go ahead, Dr. Benson.
Thank you, Ms. Pansera, Ms. Binder, members of the school board, members of the Board of Supervisors. Appreciate this opportunity to come to you in response to the invitation that was issued for the purpose of clarifying, as needed, requests that the schools have made to the county that could be potentially funded through the county CARES money that has been advanced to support our locality. So I'm here. I have a couple staff members who helped me compile the request, 2 of which, or at least 2, maybe 3 are online, and Ms. Bush, our supervisor for special student services, is here in person. So we're happy to be here. We're happy to answer questions you may have. My understanding is you have received our spreadsheet. You have the items. We did provide an itemized list. We tried to categorize it for you. We provided estimated costs for those items and then a brief description out to the right on the spreadsheet. But again, if we need to expand on any of those requests, we're happy to do so and entertain your questions. I will say, going into this, before we engage in that, just to give you a little context, and for the public, there are a couple different sources of revenue that have emerged since the pandemic began. The first on the scene was the School CARES Act funding, and King George County slated or is receiving $331,000 or so in School CARES Act funding. And I just wanted to make clear some of that funding has been utilized already. To date, we have utilized $66,192 from that fund. $42,700 was to sponsor the first 2 weeks of the YMCA child care in our schools for our employees. And there have been another $23,492 utilized for supplies, startup supplies, such as facial masks, that type of thing. I will mention, because I think it's something that's not discussed openly, that the School CARES Act funding we're able to utilize that funding. And when I say we, not just the schools, but I would hope we could broaden that, as a county, certainly through the schools. We have access to that money for 2 years. We don't have a spending deadline of December such that the County CARES Act, my understanding is supposed to be spent by December of this year. So we anticipate certainly there are going to be future needs. There may be even needs extending into next year. And I know at the time of the operating budget discussion, the awarding of that $331,000 was used to try to, I guess, mitigate the below level funding that eventually was approved at that time. One other factor that I think should be taken into consideration, and we just received word that for the current budget year and for FY22, the school's budget is going to not realize $287,795 in operating revenue due to a loss in sales tax. So I just want to make sure I'm setting the context appropriately.
What was the amount again exactly?
200 for this next fiscal year, for FY21, the amount is 287,795, and that was just received this week through a superintendent's memo. So due to the loss in statewide sales tax, the school's operating budget will be cut automatically or by default by that amount. So I just wanted to lay the landscape for you to make sure, because I know there's a lot to consider. You have competing interests, and you have several interests, varied interests, and needs throughout the county to leverage this money against. But again, I thought it fair that I give you the whole context financially as far as where the school division is for FY21, so that you can keep that mindful in your consideration. But with that said, I'm certainly here. If you would want me to go line by line, I'm happy to do that. If not, I'm happy to just entertain questions from each of you as you need to expand on the items that have been listed for you.
All right. Board, I know we've gone through this presentation before, and I know a lot of us probably have questions. I think it would be a lot easier to just have you ask questions about specific items, and the total comes to, of this whole spreadsheet, if I'm correct, 709,415. Dr. Benson? That's at the top.
Let me look. I've got
To
several.
make it clear, Madam Chair, it's 709,415 minus the requests that have already been approved by the board at the previous work sessions, totaling slightly over $1 million.
It's slightly over 1 million?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Well, that 1 million would include what you've already funded as far as the hotspots and the child care through the YMCA, correct? So 1 million minus what's already been approved.
1 million minus what's been approved, which comes to that cost total of $709,000 that you see at the top.
Is what's left. Okay. I just wanted to clarify the amount. All right. Board? Why don't you start? Richard?
I had a couple questions about the services. So you have psychological services, and you have some nurse substitutes for in-person return, and what was the other one? I thought there was another one somewhere. Anyways, I guess my question really, what it comes down to is, my understanding is the funds can only be expended through December 31st. And so, for instance, let's take the psychological services. Is that $80,000 to all be spent for between now and December 31st, or is it like salary that would go beyond that? Because my understanding is that would not be allowed in that situation, and it would have to be monies that would be expensed during that time frame.
Okay. You want to? Sure. This is Ann Bush. Ann is our supervisor for special student services. Can you hear her?
Yes.
13th, we've been unable to access students who we are supposed to be evaluating for special education services. We've had 2 psychologists on staff who work through the evaluations that evaluate the students. Together, they complete about 6 cases total a week. As of March 13th, when we shut down, we were unable to complete evaluations for students, and so they've piled up. And so right now, we have brought on 2 telepsychologists. We have a facilitator that brings the students in and works on this end, and the psychologist is remote. And so those funds would be expended towards those 2 psychologists. And so what that breaks down to for us is a total of an estimated 62 hours per week for both contractors, times 15 weeks, which gets us roughly to October 17th. It's about 930 hours, and it's approximately $87 an hour, so that's where their $80,910 comes from.
Okay, so again, that it's within that time frame, really, is where I'm going.
Yes.
Okay. I assume is that a fair assumption for all the ones that are services, like the nurse substitutes for return to in-person, that would be done before the 17th, I'm assuming.
If that,
Janitorial was the other one. Thank you,
yeah.
Mr. Britton.
And again, those types of requests in that category are predicated on a return to school in person,
Okay.
in large part. So your question's a good one. If the rules prohibited then expenditures beyond that date, we would just need clarification, and we could adjust accordingly.
Okay. Just making sure that we were all within line, the legality.
My
Uh,
hope would be we could contract for the period of time, and I don't know legally if that then constitutes an expenditure before the imposed deadline or not. I'd have to check with Mr. Britton or somebody about that.
So, at least my understanding, but I'll let Mr. Britton speak, was if the contracted time were to go beyond the December 31st timeline, then that would be outside the bounds of allowable expenditure. But I won't speak for Mr. Britton. If you had contracted services and the contracted services were to go to be provided after the December 31st deadline, that would be outside the bounds of what would be allowed to be spent.
Right, on the county funds, even if transferred, which is perfectly legal, as you know, or you wouldn't be here, to a different division, including a school division, would need to be spent under current guidance, there's not a specific guidance on this, within the bounds of the CARES Act funds when they were originally given. So y'all got, as a school board, funds that you could expend over a longer period of time, as you know, 2 years, I believe it was. But the localities get the funds to be expended by December 30th. And so there's a distinction between this laptop and the services that are provided to run the laptop. So the laptop you can buy if it's necessary for COVID-19, and you can keep it, and you can keep using it until it falls apart. But the services that may be contracted for from county CARES Act funds need to be expended and used by December 30th. So anything that has a service element like janitorial services would be, if you do open up, you'd obviously need that next semester, but you wouldn't be able to use county CARES Act funds to do that. You could use yours, but you couldn't use county CARES Act funds.
Is it a fair tactic then to look at a budget, utilize the time-sensitive CARES Act funding for one purpose, thus freeing money in an operating budget that could be used for a separate purpose that isn't time-bound?
As Madam Chair, do you want me to answer?
Go ahead, Mr. Britton.
As long as it isn't supplanting your budget that was there for non-CARES Act, non-COVID-19. So if you had, I forgot what it was, $336,000 in school board funding that you could use over 2 years, and you had planned to use some $80,000 for janitorial services, yes, and that request is in here, you can take the county funds and expend those funds so that you free up your longer time frame on your school board direct disbursements from the feds.
Okay.
How that works in accounting, I'm not sure. You would obviously, there's a record keeping and accounting provision, and if, but
I was thinking once that I had heard of a neighboring county where they have utilized funds from their operating budget for one purpose, utilized their CARES funding that needs to be spent by a certain time for a purpose they had previously, as a county, determined a need, thus freeing up that money then to be used at a later period of time that's not time-bound, their local funding, so to speak. But that's perhaps it's a different conversation. But I just offer that as to be tactical. Just as I suggested early on with the lengthy amount of time we have with the school CARES, it may be prudent then to utilize that extra time for needs that we don't know exist today that could be in play next semester, even the beginning of next year. That's all. In particular, the shortfall in sales tax. That CARES money then perhaps could help the schools if there's a shortfall at the end, so we don't have to come back to you and say we didn't realize $300,000 in sales tax, but we are able to plug that hole, so to speak, with school CARES money.
Yeah, as Mr. Britton has advised us, because the CARES Act, and I've been on some of those phone calls with the federal officials, they're going to do a lot of checking on what we use them for, and we want to make sure we have to have what we give to you has to be used by December 30th.
Sure.
In summary, Mr. Britton?
yes, that's correct. And I would suggest that any of these that are approved with a service element be amended to state through 12/30, and what Dr. Benson said seems prudent to me, that if you have longer to spend other money, spend the money first that you have to spend first.
Mr. Bush, you're going to?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Granger, I'll come back to you.
Sure,
I
that's
think
fine.
he had.
So I have a question about this. So I think we're looking at spent versus expended and obligated. So like in here, the schools are requesting janitorial services to obviously get the building disinfected or able for students to be able to attend in-person classes, which is the ultimate goal. If that doesn't happen till after December, well, this line item is null and void. It really doesn't mean anything because students aren't in there. What I think, the way I'm looking at it, and granted, I'm not an attorney, if we entered into a janitor or a cleaning services contract and those funds via the CARES Act were expended, let's say obligated, they're a line item, it's budgeted, the contract has been entered into, I don't think the services necessarily have to take place prior to December 30th. It's just that the funds need to be expended prior to December 30th. Because if that is the case, and that we have to have the services, the money done by December 30th, a lot of stuff on this spreadsheet is just pissing money away, or wasting money, excuse my language. It's just wasting money. A lot of these services, a lot of the PPE that's in here is going to be utilized when teachers and students are physically present in the building, which in all reality is probably going to be after December 30th.
Just to clarify, my understanding is the purchase of physical things, like the PPE, doesn't have to be used within the time frame of the expenditure.
Right,
It
the
just has to be
acquisition
purchased.
needs to take
The
place.
acquisition needs to take place. My understanding, though, was services, and this is based off what Mr. Britton told me. So if I'm mistaken, Mr. Britton, please feel free to help me out. But those services, the money that is being obligated would only be allowed to be obligated for the time frame going out as far as December 30th.
So
31st, sorry.
And my point, I understand that, but what I'm trying to ascertain is there a difference between the services being rendered or the services being funded, obligated, and expended? And I think the language in the CARES Act mainly speaks to obligated and expended, not so much services rendered. And that, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm looking at, because I'm fine with the services that are in here, but I'm not gonna sit here and say, yeah, I'm gonna approve $30,000 for something that is gonna do no good because nobody's physically in the building.
Right,
You know what I'm saying?
I know
All
Ms. Cup had a question on that before, Matt, and then.
So I'm on page 19, questions related to administration of fund payments. Do governments have to return unspent funds to Treasury? The last sentence, if a government has not used funds it has received to cover costs that were incurred by December 30, 2020, as required by the statute, those funds must be returned to the Department of the Treasury.
Mr. Collins, what was your?
So let's just, there's a little misunderstanding. So when we talk about October as the students going back, that's the date that's set right now for all students going back. But we will have students in school on Monday. We have some, so when you talk about janitorial services and disinfectant, whether you have 2 students or 1,000, you still have to have the same disinfectant. So the money that this request is for is to use that money instead of using the CARES that we have 2 years to spend. So when that time is up in December, then we'll tap into the CARES that we have received. So I just want to clear up the misunderstanding that there's no one in the schools. And there's staff members in the school, and there'll be students in the school.
Ms. Hoff?
I wanted to just emphasize that we currently have staff, a large number of staff in the buildings, and will continue to. And frankly, I think we need to be very mindful of the health of the staff on a continuing basis. And that certainly is applicable to the community.
Mr. Britton?
Madam Chair, so this is addressed most specifically cost incurred versus service rendered by page 6 of the latest guidance on August the 10th. number 31, may counties prepay with CARES funds for its expenses, such as a 2-year facility lease. A government should not make prepayments on contracts using payments from the fund to extend that. To do that would not be consistent with the ordinary course and policies and procedures. So that's the most specific guidance that there is on it. I think that there is some guidance out there, as Mr. Bush indicates, that if you had, for instance, a contract for 6 months and you entered into that contract on August 1st, that's a de minimis extension, and that the costs were incurred and the funds were paid, and the extension of the contract, if that's how you would normally get these services under a 6-month contract, is acceptable and they won't claw it back. I think with respect to what Mr. Bush says, in terms of not returning the funds, which is no one wants, you would have to set a deadline, and I think Mr. Young can speak to this perhaps more eloquently than I can, where there's a clawback, because the county can certainly expend it in a short period of time because of the first responder situation or other matters. So if those funds were, for whatever reason, not expended by date certain, December 5th, then they would have to be transferred back to the county so that the county could expend those funds. But I don't see the guidance which would support a complete cost incurred.
Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to, I guess, respond to Mr. Bush's comment about some of the expenses that if by chance students and staff did not return in person in October, which of course we all hope is the case, but things like PPE and stuff, I assume the concern is that if schools weren't to reopen, then you would be buying things that wouldn't be used before December. Regardless of, I think, when students go back in person, I think we all would probably agree that at whatever point that is, there are still going to be cleaning protocols and PPE and things such as that with regards to the COVID-19 situation. So I think even if things are purchased and the in-person date delays at all, those supplies are still going to be required and necessary. So I don't think it's an inappropriate use of funds.
Ms. Kepka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So because we're talking about this December 30th date, can we make it clear then? I picked up my children's MiFi hotspot today before the meeting. Thank you all very much for making those available. But my understanding is that there was a 6-month service contract attached to that, part of the funding that we allocated when we had our prior work session, the County CARES Act work session. So if for whatever reason things don't go as planned, whether that's your decision or the governor makes the decision for everyone again, is there an understanding and a mechanism for the school's CARES Act money that is allowed to be used after December 30th to kick in to cover the payments for the monthly service plan for those MiFi hotspots? I just want to make sure that is the case, and that you all generally have a mechanism in your finance section to track all of these expenditures in the event we are audited.
The answer to the first question is yes, and that's precisely the scenario I was trying to outline at the beginning, is that we would, I think, collectively be prudent to look at that flexibility with the School CARES Act money that does not exist with the county, and be somewhat tactical or strategic about that. And then secondly, yes, we do track, and I can track very closely any expenditures against the School CARES Act funding.
Mr. Granger.
So I'm going to bring it back around, and I'm just going to ask, it's a $37,000 line item, and so I just want to I'm just asking from the perspective of making sure that that's the amount that is being requested that would be legally allowed to be expended, and it's not like it's going to go beyond some time frame that would then push outside that bounds.
Refresh, are we talking about the psychological services again?
I apologize. The contracted cleaning service. I felt like the psychological services I understood, it's not like that was going to be from now through October, I think it was 17th that Ms. Bush said.
Okay.
And so that clearly is easily within bounds. It was about the contracted cleaning services.
Yes, again, that would be, I mean, the nature of this conversation could impact that, I assume, and that we would then have to be another example that if we were not unable to, I forget the term you used, Mr. Britton, but free up, so to speak, if that were not allowable, then and we had those needs, then we would need to look elsewhere in our operating budget to include any School CARES Act money. But you can see how quickly the School CARES could be eaten up by some of these expenses that may not be eligible for county CARES.
I understand, and I just want to make sure that any monies that we send your way would be able to be used.
Oh, yeah,
I just don't want to send money that can't be used and then it goes away.
Absolutely, I
That's
would
what I'm
assure
looking
you.
for.
We would certainly abide by that, and if we thought we couldn't spend it by the time, we'd certainly communicate back that it needs to be utilized.
Okay.
Because, we're one county. We certainly don't want to be part of anything giving back money. We want to leverage it for our county.
Understood. I appreciate that. Thank you. So for the PPE, I mean, obviously, I feel like that's a much more vanilla of a request and understanding because it's the purchase of physical PPE, which you can obviously do and then use outside of the time frame because there will be need. Do you have an estimate for how long you believe this PPE would be sufficient for? Are you looking for this to provide for the whole school year? Is this just for part of it? I'm just kind of curious what your expectation is for this.
Yeah, I know Ms. Fisher, our supervisor for Student and Family Services on the line. She's helped compile this. Ms. Fisher, can you hear me?
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yes. I'll do my best to repeat the question, but I believe that the nature of the question was the PPE that is listed here, the request that we've made, there is a want to know, is that an estimated need for the entire school year, or is there a certain amount of time that we predict the requests here then would last?
That is predicted through the end of the school year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The only other thing I would have is on the first couple where it talks about the Chromebooks and some of those purchases, just to make sure that it's identified in the notes that it says that these are being purchased for the purposes due to the impact due to COVID. Because obviously there could be a reason for schools to purchase these not for that reason. But this is obviously being pushed by that reason in order for it to be good justification for it.
Yeah, no, we fully anticipate the heavy use of the Chromebooks. Obviously, they're going to be used. We've had.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to justify it. I'm just asking for it to be noted in the request so that it's obvious to anyone who's looking at it, as anyone who may come back and audit it, just to say, hey, this isn't just the schools looking to buy Chromebooks, and it's not. I know that, and I'm not trying to say it is. But trying to buy Chromebooks or MiFis, this is because we had this situation with coronavirus and COVID, and we needed these to provide services to the kids so that they can just learn even. So I'm just asking for that kind of clarification in there, and it's really just a logistical thing. So that's all. I think that's all the questions I have right now. I think that's all I have right now.
Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the spreadsheet, I'm good with pretty much everything on here, except I do have a little heartburn about one line item. Lighting and AV maintenance for the auditorium here in the high school. Understand the basis for it, but given everything, I can't justify that for being used for CARES Act funding. I think we're stretching it a little bit for improvements. Even though we have moved our meetings here, I don't think that type of infrastructure maintenance should be attached to this. Aside from that, I've already expressed my concerns with everything. I'm pretty good with everything else on the spreadsheet. The only thing I would ask is that we take a hard look, let's say around the December 5th, December 10th time frame, that if the schools have money that have not been expended, that they get back to the county as soon as possible so that Dr. Young could take a look at that and we could expend those funds appropriately to where we're not returning anything back. Madam Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Mr. Stonehill?
I had also had seen the lighting as well. I didn't know what that was, except for obviously here. I kind of agree with Mr. Bush. I don't know how we can really justify doing improvements for that. I don't really think that fits. And my question was just, or my concern was just, it's hard to tell, but just the amount of PPE that's, you know, what happens if we don't go back to school until January or something? Can any of this PPE be used by other departments if it's not needed here at the school? You know, it just seems to be a lot of it, and we don't know when school is actually going to come back in session. What if it doesn't come back in at all this year? That's kind of all I've got right now. My concerns are all covered. The rest are covered.
Does anyone in the school board like to address either what Mr. Bush had mentioned or Mr. Stonehill before we move on to Ms. Kupka?
I'd like to, well, go ahead, I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify the auditorium. That was just a suggestion. It wasn't for an upgrade or improvement. It was simply to cover costs for wear and tear. The lights we're using, the conditioning of this space that ordinarily wouldn't be conditioned when we have meetings, you know, wear and tear on projector and that kind of thing. So the figure itself, certainly open to debate about that. I just wanted to clarify that the idea behind it was not to upgrade this auditorium in any way. It was simply to cover costs that we are ongoing, or we're incurring as an ongoing wear and tear and conditioning of the space kind of thing. That's all. But I certainly understand, you know, if it was perceived as an upgrade to the facility, that would be a tough stretch to relate to COVID.
Dr. Young, before we...
And yes, and Mr. Stonehill, just regarding the question about the PPE, I would advise that the board take comfort in the schools maintaining an inventory of PPE. We don't know when this disease is going away, and like the fire department has stated, the PPE, the PPE doesn't expire, and just like how the fire rescue department had explained before, they had acquired our initial inventory of PPE during the bird flu, which was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and they was lucky to have saved that inventory, because now we're actually utilizing that bird flu inventory now in response to COVID-19. So I think it's actually prudent for the schools to maintain an inventory just like the fire and rescue department does as well, if not for the COVID-19 pandemic, but for whatever's going to come down in the future.
And Dr. Young, as I would understand, that would be allowable because they've purchased it and then they could keep it on hand.
That's correct, just like laptops, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Gonzalez and then Mr. Collins.
Thank you. I was just a quick comment, I think, to tag on to Dr. Benson's comment about the auditorium. I mean, I think if the move to having meetings in here in order to maintain the social distancing as a result of the COVID-19, and therefore the maintenance fees associated with it, I think that's a very appropriate and justifiable cost. So that's all.
Thank you. Mr. Collins?
My only comment was that we talk about these dates, and, you know, we've retooled an education system in 3 months. There's going to be good and there's going to be bad. We don't know what's going to happen in October. We don't know what's going to happen in December. But from everything that we have received from information, this is our best bet forward to keep an education level that the citizens of King George expect. So that's my only comment.
Thank you. Ms. Kupka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. You took the words out of my mouth with regard to the high school. I understand where my colleagues are coming from, but I believe at our last work session, we deliberately did not fund improvements that were suggested for our own boardroom because we are meeting here. And we are meeting here, as Ms. Gonzalez said, to accommodate the social distancing requirements. Personally, I feel like they could probably use a better projector because the couple times that I've tried to look at this here, so if I'm a board member and I have a problem with this, I can't imagine what people in the audience think about that. Mr. Bush, I see you want to talk. I have a whole laundry list of things here to go through.
I'll get back to you because I have a response to that too, but it's Ms. Kupka's time.
Thank you. So questions, Dr. Benson, under instruction with regard to K-2 print digital materials, $200,884. how are those different than what materials you already have for those 3 grade levels, please?
Well, I know Ms. Hill is on the line as well, and so I don't want to steal her thunder. I'll just make one quick comment, Christine, and then you can clarify further. But my understanding is we did make a cut at the time of the operating budget, which disallowed the purchase of the K2 level. We had to defer that to another year. So given the need then, the change in need from the time we had crafted that budget in January, February to now, we really needed in particular, the digital aspect of the materials for K2 for our teachers to deliver virtually. And so we decided we're going to go forward with that. We have looked at adjustments we can make in our current operating budget to facilitate this, but quite frankly, this was a priority need, and we would look at other places where we might be able to use funding to address this need. When the solicitation came out as far as ideas for the county cares funding, this was certainly a desperate need we had for K-1-2. And so we are hopeful that you will consider that as part of the county cares funding and our ability to deliver instruction. Christine, I know I'm probably missing a bunch, and would you like to add something to that?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Benson. Good evening, board members. The materials that we use in face-to-face classroom instruction obviously are different than what is needed in this virtual setting. And that's been really one of the main struggles that we have had, is to make sure that teachers have materials that can be used through a virtual platform. We have been able to use several of our software programs to meet the needs of most of our grade levels, but in particular K1 and 2. This program that we're trying to purchase does have a robust digital side, and the digital resources are really what we're seeking to support the teachers and their instruction at K1 and 2. So when we were unable to purchase some of these things with this budget cycle, it really put us at a disadvantage for our instructional program. So this is really why we're seeking this. We just ended we have a 7-year adoption for our textbooks, and the subscription has ended for our old textbook program. And so with that, the digital package also ended. And so that's where our gap is.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hill. Let's see, next question. Chromebooks. How many Chromebooks does the school division currently possess?
Was Mr. Hopper, I know that he's running around with the distribution of the hotspots right now. Was he, John, do you know if he was online? I know that we have enough to accommodate those that have requested them. We are concerned that, as we experience heavy use with those machines, we're certainly going to have some that either malfunction, that break. We're going to need to replace some, repair some, and certainly the cycle we use to replace the Chromebooks, because they're relatively consumable. We don't replace the batteries in those. When those batteries begin to fail, you need to replace the Chromebook. So we do expect that the replacement or the need for new Chromebooks to replace ones that are worn out, that are currently being used, that are maybe 4 years old at this point, we'll have that need at some point this year to replace those that fail.
Okay.
So that's a large part of that request.
Thank you. Then the next line item, staff for board meeting support, $2,400, 120 hours of staff support at $20 per hour. How does that differ from at the bottom under school board / BOS support, staff for virtual board meeting support, $2,400, 120 hours of staff support at $20 per hour. Is that a duplicative entry? Should we strike one of those, or is that something different?
No, I think that's the case, Ms. Kupka. I apologize that that was duplicated on the spreadsheet, but they are one and the same.
Okay. So then is that someone who sort of does what Mr. Dines does for us and runs the go-to meeting and logs people in and lets them speak and so
Correct.
forth?
Correct.
So you all will have a provision to have your own person that does that?
He's up there now.
He
Yep.
is? Okay. All right. I think those were the only... Oh, and then one other question. So, and I know my colleagues have brought this up with regard to when school opens, and I realize it's a moving target possibly, but so nurse substitutes for return to in-person, that's $32,400. That's a big chunk of change. That's, again, something that if in-person doesn't, or if that is not a need that you actually have and you actually incur, you'd be, notifying us. And I feel like even your December 5th or 10th is a little too late, maybe like November 30th or something like that. I don't know if my colleagues agree, but to kind of give us a ballpark of where you're at with regard to unspent funds that you just cannot possibly expend before December 30th.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you very much, Dr. Benson and your staff.
Right, before I go, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, I understand going back to this auditorium and that we are utilizing this and the school board's utilizing this, but wasn't maintenance of this equipment and the auditorium, if school was going to be in session, that was accounted for in the regular budget that was submitted and approved. So these things should have been accounted for. I understand we are utilizing it. It's something that we can attach this for wear and tear, but I just think it is a stretch because that's something that was funded in the regular budget that the school board submitted and was approved. And I bring that back along with, and Ms. Kupka highlighted this for me because I had overlooked it, but staff for meetings, you would have those staff present at regular meetings, COVID related or not. And the reason I'm nickel diming, and I know that's exactly what I'm doing for $17,400 between the two, is because the county is facing a recession. And the truth is, the monies that aren't expended towards the schools for the CARES Act goes to public safety. And we need those dollars regardless how people may feel. The county is in a recession. So next year, we have another budget cycle we have to go through. And the schools are going to come back requesting local contribution. Well, that's going to be weighed against what the county has to address too in a recession environment. So I think the things that we don't need to spend this on, we shouldn't, and we should apply them where they're most needed. So by saying most needed, I think the plan with monies that aren't utilized going to public safety is where it's most needed more than audiovisual for the auditorium. That's all I'm saying. So those $17,400, I believe, should be applied somewhere else. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Could I respond to that comment?
Yeah, I'd like to. Go ahead, TC.
Well, before you respond, let me put I was going to go last, but this one gets me a little bit too, for the fact that we let you guys use our boardroom for how many years? We don't charge the school board, correct? You use our audio-visual equipment, our boardroom for years, and we don't charge the school board. So it's sort of, to me, a wash. And, that's to me. It's kind of like actually for the upkeep of this building. We don't charge people for the upkeep of the boardroom and using it for meetings. So that's where that's the one I got the most on. And the staff, you would already have the staff. We don't give Mr. Dines extra money for being here, to do our meetings or regular meetings. So that's my comment. And then do you have to talk on this, Mr. Granger? And then I'll get to you, Mr. Collins, and then whoever else wants to.
It had to do with those two same items. I just wanted clarification in regards to a $15,000 line item. Is that Is your expectation that it's going to cost an additional 15,000 more to maintain this area due to supporting the meetings? Because I do appreciate what my colleagues are saying is if you did have maintenance already in place, that wouldn't apply. But if you're saying, hey, there are additional strains on this, and in order to support that, it will cost more because the fact that we have coronavirus, so we have to do them here. That's what I'd like to understand.
So can I address
Go
that,
ahead,
Mr.
Mr. Collins.
So the auditorium and all the stuff in the schools, we have a joint use agreement with people that use the facilities. And the joint use agreement has different layers depending upon your organization. So no, you don't charge the school board to use that facility, but that's already in your budget to care for that facility. So this facility tonight will all have to be disinfected. There'll have to be a custodian to do that. There'll have to be material to do that. This is not what we have normally done. 2 or 3 nights a week, this is being used for a public meeting. And so 2 or 3 nights, you have additional costs that we don't incur. Our janitors don't clean this. They clean it when it's used or general cleaning. So this is a high use, high possibility of transmission area. So there is cost associated with it.
Right, but this, to me, this is the way I read it, is for lighting and AV, not cleaning supplies.
I'll just start with electrical.
And I don't think it would cost $15,000. I'm not an expert.
I didn't mean to express that it was exclusively for audiovisual. No, I
Okay.
thought, in wear and tear, I assumed that it meant not just the use but the conditioning of the space, those types of expenses that are not, tangible projector, that kind of thing.
I'm just going from the spreadsheet and the term that was used. Do you guys want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, Mr. Vance is not usually attending or working any of our school board functions until the COVID-19 pandemic happened. So we haven't done virtual meetings before. So, his, helping us is definitely a cost that we have incurred due to the pandemic. And I think that it would be valuable if we could leave that on there.
But his services would only be able to be used for this until December 30th, basically. So you would have to budget that afterwards.
Correct.
Ms. Cuthbert?
Madam Chair, may I? So is it fair to say then, as far, and perhaps Dr. Benson, you're the person to answer this, but as far as Mr. Vance's contract goes, until COVID happened, he was not under contract to attend your meetings, right? And provide the virtual support that he now has to do because of COVID, right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Granger, I know you had wanted to ask.
I just wanted, I don't feel like I got my question answered. The $15,000 line item, is it an additional $15,000 on top of what you were already expecting to maintain this area for meetings? That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Okay.
To include, if we upgrade, the ability to project for both boards or for these types of meetings, planning council, whoever utilizes the space, yes, we would not have otherwise upgraded. So that would be a cost above and beyond.
And that's fine. I just wanted to make sure.
Right.
Any dollars that are being identified are beyond what was already expected to be cost. So if it isn't an additional $15,000, then that would qualify because of the situation we're in. I just want to make sure it's not like, hey, we would normally spend $5,000, we're going to spend $15,000, so we're going to ask for 15. In that case, you can only ask for 10. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Yes, but I will say in fairness, the 15,000 is simply an estimate.
Okay.
That's an estimate. So
understood, and I assume it would be a similar situation to like the services as we get closer to that end line period. If you're looking at it and you're like, hey,
oh yeah,
we just didn't expend it, then at that point we'd ship the money, certain amount of money back, and then the county could expend it.
True, but unlike the services, we were able to compute those, on an hourly basis, that type of thing.
Tracking. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Stonehill and then Mr. Bush.
Madam Chair, you were just talking about different usage and cleanings and everything. What about all the schools for the churches and all that stuff? Is that any extra in here for that? Or is the school doing that, or are the churches all responsible for doing all that?
They're not responsible for, well, they're responsible for paying the fee that we charge to cover that cost. So with the use of a facility, there's an agreement drawn up between, let's say, the church and this facility. In that agreement, then the cost for custodial services out beyond the service to sanitize and that type of thing, that's included in that contract. And so they pay that cost as an organization.
Now, is that something, are they doing extra sanitizing? Is there an increased charge on those guys that use those facilities?
Yes, and the number of hours that it takes to do the deep cleaning, so to speak, or the the high touch wiping, the extra cleaning would take longer to do than it would ordinarily, perhaps. And in that case, then there is an additional charge because of the hourly rate we bill for custodial support for those events.
But that's built into their charge, that extra.
It is, because it's the worksheet that we use is in our policy, but you can see that there's a per hour charge, so that if we anticipate it's going to take 2.5 hours now where it was taking 1, then the multiplier obviously changes and the cost increases for those organizations.
Okay.
I don't know, I have that form in my head, and I know you may not have seen it, but we actually develop a contract with each organization, and we do a cost estimate. We use a form that says, okay, we'll need this many rooms. Here's the charge per room per hour. Here are the number of hours we need in terms of custodial support for the event. Here's the charge per hour. That carries out to a column that then is totaled at the bottom and given to the organization as an estimate of cost before we enter into the agreement for the facility use.
Okay. That just came into mind. Thank you.
Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in line with the churches. So I made an inquiry last year or maybe 2 years ago about what happens with the funds that go to the schools that the churches pay to utilize the facilities. So the county's carrying the bond. And previously in the budget where it reflected income sources or revenues that were coming in, I never saw that income line item in the budget. So the reason I bring that up is because when I had inquired about it last year, I was told that the money that went from the rental services or whatever for the churches went to the drama. And that was to take care of the lighting and the AV, et cetera, for the auditoriums at each perspective, whether it's the middle school or the high school. So if that funding or the rental fee from the churches is to take care of that, I think this is duplicative. Also, if we're bringing up the cleaning services for this that are extra, well, cleaning services are a line item in the request. Again, I think that the $15,000 associated with the auditorium in this request is unnecessary. I think it's duplicative of a lot of things, and I really think it's a stretch. Again, I support the rest of this request, but that $15,000 line item, I can't support. Thank you.
Can I answer his question on
Go
the
ahead,
churches?
Mr. Collins.
So the churches, their use agreement is different. All churches have the same use agreement. That money goes into an entire school. Whatever school is renting that facility gets the money to spend on items. If you talk about drama, so there was a lighting upgrade that would have been a CIP item. So we use that money for supplemental, so we don't have a request further down the line. We need $100,000 for lighting or whatever, or more cafeteria tables. So that is a supplemental. We use that as a supplemental to keep our requests down for CIP. You'll notice that our CIP requests have dwindled over the years. So that we use all these formulas to try to keep our finances, so we don't have to keep jumping into the county funds.
And while all that is true, and I agree, I've seen it. You guys have done a phenomenal job by bringing some of that stuff down. But back to my point, that paid for the lighting, like you just said, it supplemented the lighting.
So we
would be
for the
paying.
lighting. I don't know exactly what it paid for in this school, but I know that there's a lot of items that would have made it to you all if it weren't for those entities basically paying for it. So we use it as a supplemental, not as a slush fund, as you like to say.
Does anybody else have, before I ask my questions? Anybody? All right, well, as you already heard, I still have some heartburn over that one, including the staff for the virtual board meeting. And then my other question, Ms. Kupka highlighted this a little bit, the nurse substitutes for return in person. So that money wouldn't be utilized if, say, you didn't go back October 15th. I mean, you got 32,000, but is that for a short amount of time from October 15th to December 30th, or is that from now?
No, that's estimated. Sorry. That would be estimated for the year, should we return on in the middle of October.
Okay.
So it kind of goes back to the initial clarification in terms of the availability of county cares. You know, more of I guess, a functional what's allowable with the county cares. You know, we weren't necessarily thinking about what's allowable with county cares when formulating the request. That's really, we defer obviously to the county attorney.
And I know a lot of this, the rules for CARES Act, as Mr. Britton can tell you, his working paper is ever changing. The rules keep changing and we have to follow the best practices at the time. But my other question to Mr. Britton, this is illegal, is can we set an end date like my colleagues have suggested, November 30th, December 1st, whatever it is that we need to report so we know what has been expended, so if we have to request the money back so we can then spend the expenditures, what's the legal on that?
Yes.
So just yes, we can have an end date. Okay. I like that. That was I've never had an answer from you like that. There was 3 letters.
Ma'am, the answer is yes.
Dr. Young?
And the answer is also is highly advisable. I'd highly recommend that the board do consider that clawback date, if you will.
All right, thank you. Does any of the school board members have a question, comment?
No, just your end date, I would put December 1st as opposed to November.
I just want to make, I know it seems like in some respects we're nickel and dime, but this is what the federal government has given us as guidelines for this money, and they're going to keep track of it and make sure that we spend it properly, or they're going to come a calling for us. So what does my colleagues think? And then there's also a dollar amount.
I'm just going to ask Dr. Young, December 1st, to me that seems like it's a reasonable amount of time. I just would like for you to weigh in. Do you feel that's enough time in order to expense any funds at the county level, if that were to happen?
Yes, sir. Let me answer that, but let me also provide a little bit more clarity on some activity that's been transparent to you all. But the local managers and the finance directors of each locality has actually been reached out to by the Department of Treasury and advising us of, or they advised us of, the federal government has actually started an automated system now that each locality must sign on to as a subrecipient. And if you had read the FAQs from the original correspondence from the Department of Treasury to now, you'll see that originally it had more of a laissez-faire approach to accountability for the funding. But now the current stance that's coming from the feds or coming down upon the states coming down on the localities, is becoming much more stringent, and they're going to tighten the screws on proper accountability of the expending of these monies, up until the point where they are even going to have surveillance and potential auditing of funds. So again, I would highly advise the board, I'd highly advise the school board to ensure that you all are maintaining a very strong record of all your expenditures that's coming from the use of that funding, number one. Then number two, I would recommend to the board that we do maintain a December 1st timeframe, which I think is adequate, to have a clawback clause in place. So in the event that this money isn't spent by the school board, the county can go ahead and recoup it. We can go ahead and properly expend it and not turn it over to the state, because that is a reality that we're facing now that they're taking a stronger stance on accountability.
I'm down with 1 December.
Any of you guys have a question based on that new information? Mr. Collins?
I don't have a question, but I you know, if you look at our finances, you look at our audits, We don't want to be in any problems whatsoever, and we're not going to put our school system in jeopardy by it. You know, we would seek advice, counsel, if we even think that it's not what it's supposed to be. So I can rest assured of you that it'll be tightly watched and tightly managed.
And I think it was about a month ago, I was on a White House call, and they said this was coming down eventually, and it's here, and that they were going to be very watchful of the money to make sure it was spent, or it goes back to the state and all that, or to the federal government. So what's the pleasure of my board?
Just to also clarify, I thought I heard Ms. Kupka asking if there was a duplicate line item in regards to the staff of board meetings, and that was corroborated by Dr. Benson, that there was an additional it was doubled up access.
Yes, the 2,400 is duplicative.
I would show then that the total request then would be at $707,015 as opposed to $709,415 with my quick math, I guess. Does that seem reasonable to everyone from the request perspective? Okay. I thought I could do it, but I appreciate the back.
Mr. Britton.
Just one thing, Madam Chair, if you're moving towards approval of this, this spreadsheet that was presented, the first 3 items in green, and I think the janitorial supplies that have been set out, if you're going to approve this by line item or by as presented, I would suggest that those first 3 be amended to put in as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic or what have you. And on line item contracted cleaning services, again, as a result of the pandemic through 12/30/2020. Those 3 are the only ones that don't have that. I believe one has some, the MiFis or Chromebooks have some some mathematics in there, but those were the only ones that didn't have the COVID-19 justification. And I say that in following up on what Mr. Collins said, because the current guidance states that the locality, the department of the locality which receives the CARES Act is responsible for the accounting, bookkeeping, and spending of it, and the auditing will be of that department. So it's the county's responsibility to make sure that the transfer is made as a result of COVID-19. Once the transfer is made, it's the responsibility of the school board to spend it in accordance with federal law.
Mr. Britton, with that being said, for the motion, would it be better to do the line by line or as an overall amount?
I think it would be better and faster to do it as an overall amount with those amendments that you could certainly do it by category, but with the amendments that you've heard tonight from the school board already, that these are directly as a result of the pandemic, but maybe they condition upon, an updated spreadsheet. But I don't think you should do it by the spreadsheet, is what I'm saying, because it doesn't contain that language. It doesn't memorialize the discussion that went on.
Should we offer a cover letter or something to the spreadsheet that would then be very explicit about the following expenses are to cover costs associated with COVID? Something to that effect, or is it simply a matter of adjusting the description on the sheet?
It's a matter of the motion and Madam Chair, and the description as you've just heard. So I think it's just the motion tonight is what's important, and I'm just counseling against moving this in. I hereby move. Right, that would not work. Don't say so moved.
Mr. Bush?
Madam Chair, I would request that we approve this by category, especially with the discussions that took place about the auditorium tonight. I wouldn't want to have to vote a certain way against the whole slate when my, I can't think of the word. I would be voting against it simply based on one line item, the auditorium. I don't want to have to be put in that position. I would rather vote on this by category. And I would also like for the 1 December reporting date to be included whenever we do that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Young?
And Madam Chair and Mr. Bush, if we vote by category, I think that would be a little difficulty to that, because we first would probably need to add up all these expenditures under each category, and it's currently not totaled like that. It seems like from what I understand, it seems like the only point of debate at the moment is if the board is going to fund the $15,000 request for maintenance or not. I would recommend, instead of going through by category, and if that's the only point of contention, just have a vote or consensus by the board regarding that specific line item, and then go ahead and move forward with appropriate or approving a certain amount, whether it's going to be with that $15,000 or without that $15,000.
I'm amenable to, I'll just throw my vote in
Go
first to
ahead.
get the ball rolling. I'm amenable to the 15,000, so I'm in favor of including it in the total request.
So what I was going to suggest is we just vote for the dollar amount, and then we've definitely heard that Mr. Bush and
It's
even
against.
myself, are not in total agreement. But I think, to be good stewards and the schools are important, that maybe just this amount and just let it go. I mean, just the 700. I might be saying that wrong.
I don't think we'd want to vote for just a dollar figure. I think, as Mr. Britton said, we want to then clarify that it has to deal with, based on the presentation, to also include some of that verbiage in regards to pay for the K2 print material and the Chromebooks and the MiFis. It has to deal with, as a result of the COVID, and contracted services as well has to do with the result of COVID, and it would have to be during the time frame. So I think we need
the clarification.
I think we need that extra data in there aside from just a dollar figure.
Okay.
So,
Do you want to make the motion?
Do you agree with that?
I do, and you would also not be able to do it as a dollar figure and have any clawback, because then there wouldn't be any line item, there wouldn't be any line item restrictions.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I'm in favor. Obviously, Mr. Bush is opposed.
We're talking just about the auditorium.
Yep,
Yeah,
and
just
whether
about the
we'd add it or
auditorium.
not. And so when we make
Yes,
the motion, so we can.
I'm opposed to the auditorium funding.
I am too, so that's
All right.
two of us there.
So,
But
Mr. Stonehill?
I think I'm just opposed to that one number. I mean, it just seems that it's 15,000 is a lot, 8, came up with a different amount just for that. I understand that it's got to be cleaned, and if it's conditioned for more than normally it is, 15 it just seems way high, in my mind. But if we can come up with another number and then approve everything.
So, Dr. Benson, I'll just throw this out there. Dr. Benson did say, obviously this would be part of the clawback clause. So if we get to December 1st and they're looking, hey, we just are not spending that kind of dollar figure, then we could at that point say, hey, let's bring that back. So I guess the question is, are you opposed to spending, let's ask this, are you opposed to spending any money for this line item?
No.
Okay, you're not opposed to that. So
Correct.
Is the clawback enough for you to feel comfortable with that dollar figure?
If they return the unused funds, yes.
I mean, I think they've already said that.
Yes.
Dr. Benson? Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So are you, not to try to put words in your mouth,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stonehill, but
All right, I got you.
are you cool with it then?
Yes.
I'm not trying to force or strong arm you, I'm just asking.
I'm okay.
Okay.
It just, like
well,
I said.
and in phrase with that, I'm even okay with that part. It's just that 15,000 was a little too much for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying. So I mean, we could craft that. We definitely have to have an end date and a clawback. Mr. Brenton?
If I could make a suggestion, it could be done, since you're only talking about one line item. Dr. Young has, is that a 9 or a 4?
That's a 9.
Okay. Dr. Young has calculated it without the line item in question. So what you could do is move to transfer the amount of $692,115 to the school board for purposes of expenditures as set forth in the amount and line items in the spreadsheet, and as amplified for justification at the public meeting, with a date of December 1st to return any unexpended funds to the county. And that can be one motion. And then the $15,000 is just a separate motion.
Okay.
And
then
otherwise
that
you would
also-
have to go through line item by line item.
And that also clarifies because of COVID-19.
That's right, because and then that's not contingent. I'm sure Dr. Benson can give you an updated spreadsheet, but you have all stated the reasons, and there was a reason stated correctly about bulk goods or goods purchased that last all year, and that's fine, and all those reasons have been amplified. So anyway, that would be one suggestion, and the amount is $692,015 to be transferred to the school board for purposes of lawful expenditure under the CARES Act for the line items and in the amounts as set forth in the spreadsheet presented at the public meeting by the school board, and any unexpended funds as of December 1st, 2020 shall be returned to the county.
So moved. Thank you, Mr. Britton.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Chair votes aye, motion carries.
Okay, now do we want to have a discussion about the?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm fine with putting the 15, but if my colleagues would like to reduce that, obviously, I'm okay with that as well. I mean, whatever the consensus is.
Mr. Bush?
I would just like to remind this body that there's other things that this funding can be used for, and we really do need to consider that. $15,000 is significant for something that is already a line item in an existing budget, and where they get additional funds from other sources for the same facility. I feel that the lighting and the AV that is line itemed in this request is a stretch at best. And I don't think it applies. I understand the justification that was provided. I still come to the conclusion it's a stretch. And that $15,000, the entirety of it, needs to be applied somewhere else. I think we've done a significant contribution with our CARES Act money towards the schools, especially when the schools still have balance of their own CARES Act funding that they could utilize down the road. I think we had a very good working relationship with the schools and we met their needs, but this one line item I just cannot see given to when the county needs it so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Stonehill?
Once again, I mean, I think it's high, but as Mr. Granger said, if it's one of those things where if it's not used and we don't come back in here and find all new furniture, or all new lights or all new equipment, I'd be good with the 15 amount if we make sure that's going to be coming back to us by December 1st to be used for other things. But I mean, I just hate to be answering to people also and saying, hey, they got a whole new auditorium out of this. So if it comes back, I'm good with the 15, I think.
Ms. Gupka?
So I just want to remind my colleagues, I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Bush, with regard to the $336,000 that the schools received in direct CARES Act funding, but we were told in a memo at the August 4th Board of Supervisors meeting that at the end of fiscal year 2020, King George County Schools returned a surplus of roughly $500,000, which resulted in those funds being deposited back into the general fund. That was something that we demanded of them when we created the original budget, knowing that they were going to get the $336,000 from CARES, and therefore we cut $300,000 from their budget. They did what we demanded of them, and we have no reason to believe that they would not do the same in this circumstance as well. Thank you.
My problem was with the 15,000, and I have a counter to if we rounded it up to 700,000. So whatever the amount difference would be. But I know, but that I've let everybody talk the whole time. I'm just putting in my feelings, and it still bothers me. And this might be nitpicky, and I usually never nitpick the schools, but we let you use the boardroom, and we don't ask back. And I'm just saying that's for me. and people can be mad at me all they want. I really just putting out my fund. We have a lot of needs that I do agree with Mr. Bush. We have a lot of needs that are coming down the pike that benefit all of our citizens, but I'm willing to let this one go because, you know, I know you guys will turn it back if it's not needed. But I just had to give my piece. Everybody said their piece here. I got to say my piece. Thank you.
So, Ms. Bender, if I were to make a motion in favor of the 15, would you be okay with that? Or
I would be okay with that.
Mr. Stonehill, would you be okay with that? Okay.
I
want
just
to
had
make
to
it
say
and then
my
have
piece.
us all change. And if you guys want to go less, if the two of you want to go less, just tell me now, and I'll just make the motion appropriately.
I'm okay. I just had to say my piece.
Okay. Then I would make, I move to transfer 15,000 from the CARES Act funding to the school board for the purposes of the lighting and AV maintenance at the King George High School as outlined in the spreadsheet, to include audio visual lighting maintenance, as well as cleaning services or any other needs to support meetings at that facility due to the COVID pandemic.
Do we have a second?
Mr. Britton,
Oh,
do I need a friendly amendment?
With a December 1st
Yes.
End date for the expenditures of those funds.
Subject to clawback December 1st. Funds not expended by December 1st, 2020.
Shall be returned to the county.
Shall be returned to the King George County Board of Supervisors.
Right.
Second. A friendly amendment, I guess, and
So
Is that the
second,
correct language?
yes.
second.
I second your amendment.
So we got a proper first and second.
Thank you, Ms. Kupka.
Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any nays?
Nay.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. All right.
Madam Chair, can I just take a
Yes.
moment just to say thank you very much? We don't say often enough, but we do appreciate the difficult deliberations you have to enter into, not just in this context, but in operating budget. We understand the competing interests, and we do appreciate the support locally for our children, our students, and more pervasively, our community. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. And I actually visited Potomac today to pick up Molly's packet, and I did see they were doing everything like the little enclosures you create. I know it's a tough time. We're all, we're learning as we go. So thank you, Dr. Benson, too. All right. One quick question just for bookkeeping. Since we are moving on to just board items, if we just let the school board
Adjourn.
or
Yeah,
if they
so
want to stay.
we are actually in session two.
Yeah, if they want to adjourn.
Yeah, so we're in session, right. So
Right.
I would just like to see if we could go through a board comment.
Yeah.
Do
Go
you
ahead.
would you guys like to have a board comment? Mr. Collins, is that what you had asked,
No,
requested?
I asked for, no,
Just to adjourn?
I asked for us to adjourn our school board
Okay,
meeting.
all right. Sorry, I thought he was asking for something else.
I was just making sure in case you guys wanted to adjourn and go home.
No, yes, I
Can we
think we'd
adjourn?
like to do that.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the King George County
Yes.
School Board meeting.
Second.
I have a really hard time understanding everything, so Mr. Collins did request, okay, and it was second, all right? Okay. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries.
And thank
We
you
are now
guys for
adjourned.
coming and coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank
Yep.
you guys
Thank you
very
all.
much.
And we'll make 5 minutes so they can go out. And then we'll resume our meeting. Zach?
On the mic. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you all will see, when we discuss the way ahead, obviously with the $707,000 that was allocated to the schools, there still remains a balance of the second allocation of CARES Act funding, which of course I'd recommend that we have a third work session to determine how or come up with that spend plan for that second allocation of funding. However, I do have one request that I'm asking in advance of that third work session, and what I would like to request is $15,000 for what we are calling the COVID-19 county employee testing policy. I've been speaking with Matt Britton, Chief Moody, Sheriff Giles, Amanda Samuel, and myself, and we have come to realize that we've had no less than 14 either confirmed cases or cases of employees that have been exposed to COVID-19, and we had to actually isolate them or quarantine them. The majority of these cases are actually well, now I wouldn't say the majority, a significant amount of these cases were actually potential exposures are actually confirmed cases as a result of the county employees doing their duties. Naturally, when you do have the employees that do get confirmed case or they do have an exposure, we work in close quarters within the county's facilities. So even though we do send those employees home, we still have those that remain at work, and they have to live through that 14 days of anxiety, not knowing if the individual is confirmed, number one, and then number two, if they themselves have been exposed or now a confirmed case. So that's one side of the challenge. The second side of the challenge is we don't have a comprehensive policy as we speak on when an employee can be authorized by the county to come back to work. Currently, we go by some guidelines by both the VDH and the CDC, and I'm sure the board is aware that it's been the county experience that these guidelines change at least weekly, if not on sometimes daily. We've seen the temperature thresholds change. We've seen the requirement to wear gloves change. We've seen even the symptoms if someone's been exposed to COVID-19, it used to be, well, after 14 days and no symptoms, then they come back to work. Then it changed to 10 days and no symptoms, then they can come back to work. Then it changed from 10 days with no symptoms and 48 hours without medication, or 72 hours without medication to 48 hours without medication. So the bottom line, I hate to state this publicly, but I will. I don't have a lot of faith in the CDC guidelines or the VDH guidelines, at least not enough faith to gamble with county employees' health and their lives. We have at least 15% of King George County's employees have been identified or self-disclosed the fact that they have underlying conditions. Those are the known. I don't even know what's not known, number one, amongst county employees, or what they have with their children or the loved ones. And what I would like to do is have this meeting with the executive management team that I just identified to you all before and put in place a policy where King George County employees, if they have been exposed to COVID-19, whether it be through professional work or through personal work, they will be afforded an opportunity to receive a rapid test at the county's expense. And more importantly, if someone is confirmed as COVID-19 positive and they're a county employee, they will be tested at the county expense negative prior to being afforded the opportunity to come back to work. And if the board is so moved to approve that policy and move forward with it, that will come at a cost of about $15,000 to $20,000 of CARES Act funding. I've spoken with Matt. It is illegal. We can legally require employees to test negative prior to coming back to work. We can legally pay for employees to take COVID-19 testing. And I think that would be one of the greatest protections that we can provide our employees, that as close as we can get to 100% confidence that we would give them, that they are working in a safe working environment and they can continue to do their job safely without threatening their lives or threatening that of their families. So I would like the board to consider appropriating $20,000 of the remaining CARES Act funding to county employee COVID-19 testing. And that money, of course, would be exhausted through December 30th, or it would be returned to the board for consideration on another expenditure.
And I just want to clarify, this would be from the second CARES Act allocation?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay. Any questions? Thoughts? Does that have to be, that has to be my motion, correct?
Yes, yes,
All
Madam
right.
Chair.
I just wanted to double check.
I move to approve the request as presented by Dr. Young.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstentions? Mr. Bush? Oh, I didn't hear you? You didn't have your microphone on. Equipment malfunction there. Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Mr. Britton, request to advertise e-summons system ordinance for public hearing.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a request for advertisement, but the Virginia law, state law requires that the courts have an e-summons system, and the localities can charge $5 per convicted traffic offense or crime. So it's just, again, it's like the courthouse security fee. It's only if you're convicted of it. And that goes and is restricted to support that system. So currently, we're supporting that system without this. I wanted to bring it immediately tonight, even though you had a joint board meeting, because it has a positive. All the ones that I'm finding out that we don't have that have a positive fiscal impact, I'm trying to get it to y'all as quickly as possible. But much like this courthouse security fee, these are people who have been convicted, and it's supporting something that we're required to pay for, and so it otherwise you're spending tax dollars. So if it's if you so desire, if you wanted to call for a motion to advertise the electronic summons system assessment fee ordinance.
Again, like you said, we could work out the dates as long as they authorize us to advertise.
For public hearing.
So moved.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Britton.
You're welcome, Madam Chair. And I would just, whenever you can get that on, I don't think there's going to be anybody like a big public comment, and it takes a little gear up system for the district courts, especially that have most of the cases. So you'll start collecting the fees the quicker you get the ordinance passed.
Thank you. Dr. Young, request for work session date for remainder of second allocation of funds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As stated, we do have a remaining balance of the second allocation. I would recommend the board provide us a date for our work session, and we will basically take the same process that we did during that first work session, where we would have a CIP process similar to that, or a process similar to our CIP. We have county departments come and present requests, and we then have the board approve a spend plan that would be appropriated via resolution at a subsequent date.
Do you have, anybody have available dates? I'm pretty open, so.
It'd have to be at least a week out, right, for advertising purposes?
For advertising purposes, it had to be 3 days out, I'd recommend a week out, because that way any of the departments will have time to adjust their requests, which I doubt it would change much, but that give them a little bit of react time.
Wednesday, September 2nd?
Back-to-back meetings, that's always fun, yeah.
I'd recommend the week of the 7th.
Okay.
Just not the 9th, because that's our town hall.
How about the 8th? People go on the 8th?
Is the 8th
Which
okay
would be
with
the
everybody?
following it's a Tuesday. It's our off Tuesday. Is everyone amenable to that?
Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
At 6:30? Or 6?
There's a planning commission meeting on the villages that night.
Yeah, we probably.
Where would they be holding? They would be here. So I guess the question would be, where would we hold our meeting? Obviously, and I think we would probably want Mr. Britton at our.
How
meeting.
about? Go ahead.
I think that we can. If Mr. Britton wanted to handle the planning commission meeting, I think that we can handle the CARES Act funding. And if the planning commission meeting, naturally, I think that would take more here at the auditorium. We could easily have it at company number 1,
okay.
And we could set up the process to bring one director in, bring them out, one director in, bring them out, just to accommodate the social distancing. But I don't think that it's going to draw the crowd to overwhelm this company number 1.
Madam Chair, I agree with that, and also I can participate remotely, so I can go ahead and log into the meeting where you're at, and you can let me know if you need a legal issue, and I can just step away from the planning commission meeting, but they have requested that I attend the planning commission. I think that's
Right, and I think, Mr. Brennan, as you stated, we could have you so you could step out and then respond to our question, and I could send you a chat first, and then you could step out and answer our question
Okay.
for us.
So.
I don't have
I'm
a
good
problem with that. And do we have to do it in Cumberland One? Could we do it in the boardroom? I mean, just throwing it out there.
We could do it in the boardroom.
Okay.
That's fine.
So is
No
everybody
problem.
okay with that?
I don't care.
6 or 6:30?
So, I guess
September
just,
1st.
I'm sorry, the only question would then be, I guess the department, I should be easy enough for department, never mind. The silly question. Or rescind.
May I make an adjustment? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Because I'm looking at my calendar, and if we commit to September 8th, that basically is I'm gonna be at 3 different meetings in a row with the
How
board
about
meeting.
that
joint-
Thursday? Is that Thursday amenable to anyone?
Well, I had the EDA meeting for the courthouse, which I discussed
On
with you all.
Thursday?
If the board was so amenable, could we look at, if we did it the week of the 31st, could we do it like the 3rd Thursday?
Thursday.
Yeah, I can make that work.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that should get the directors plenty of time to adjust, make any adjustments to their request.
Yeah,
that they
that's
need.
fair.
Is everyone else good with that? Okay.
All right, we're good.
Yeah, I went through a 3-meeting night last weekend. And
Yeah, it's all good.
I'm not young anymore.
All right. With that
6:30
please-
p.m.
And please send out an invite as
Right.
always.
6:30. Okay.
Yes. And then next up is a motion for adjournment.
I move to adjourn until Tuesday, September 1st at 6:30 in the King George High School auditorium.
Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any nays? Chair votes aye. Motion carried. We are adjourned.